Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 2020 Indiana Arts Homecoming. We are kicking it off today with Shelby Nower and Kassie Woodworth. They'll be sharing about their exciting recent work. Just some homecoming tip or housekeeping tips, could keep yourself muted and your videos turned off for the duration of the meeting. And we will turn it over to Kassie to go ahead and begin.
Hello everyone, I'm Kassie Woodworth. I worked on one of the projects that was for the Indiana State House as a permanent exhibit to celebrate the Women's Centennial this year for women's right to vote. So this is the creative warm-up session, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my project and mostly focus on the process, a little bit about the history and my inspiration. So it's going to be very much a show and tell of images. So. I graduated from Heron School of Art and Design in May of 2019. My degree is in sculpture, and I also focused on printmaking, but I really just kind of do whatever medium I want to, whatever I have access to, really. Here's some of my work. This is a little bit from undergrad, a little bit of what I'm working on now. I'm going the direction of printmaking and paper sculpting. You can see more of this on my website. It's just kassiewoodworth.com. If you want to check out some more work. I am the 2019-2020 resident of the Stutz, the studio resident. So I really was able to propose larger projects than I normally would, working out of my basement. So that's why I really wanted to go for this project and go big. So a little bit in this imagery is me working on part of the piece, and my little assistant, my sister, helping me make it. So, and here's the final piece and all the detail shots, and I'll have some more detail shots in the next slides. But just to give you an overall idea of the project, the women on here are specifically women that helped with the movement in Indiana and were huge contributors to the art scene and the women's movement, and just really, really wonderful, powerful women. And the goal of the piece as a whole was to have a juxtaposition of traditional and non-traditional, being that the movement was kind of a non-traditional, standing out, speaking up movement. So the women in the foreground are really trying to stand out with all their beads and their embellishments. And over-adorned clothing is often meant to express it, a way of standing out. So that, with the background of the traditional quilt making, was kind of the idea of the non-traditional. And I'm not a quilter. I'm a sculptor of metal and wood, but I wanted to really emphasize the history of quilting as a passed down craft, mostly by women to women and their children and so on. So here's a few more images of the quilt. And it was definitely a learning process, a lot of YouTube watching to learn how to make it. And I had a lot of help from my mom. My mom taught me how to sew at a really young age, so having that confidence that she taught me how to sew gave me the confidence that I could figure it out, and especially that we could figure it out together. So she was really, really excited about the project, and she was one of the initial inspirations for the piece. She's a really strong, powerful woman, and there's a lot of strong, powerful women around me, and I wanted to emphasize the fact of how far we've come in the past 100 years, and how our vote is so, so important and so powerful. And I felt like this piece really emphasized the fight that we've been through for the past 100 years. Here's some detail shots. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process for you artists out there. Maybe there's some quilters in the audience too, but along the border, I really emphasize the physical quilting process and the pattern that came on that. The embroidered flowers on the corners are for the Indiana State flower, which is the peony. And that was all hand embroidered. I'll talk a little bit more about that process later because it's a little bit more significant with another part of the piece. The lettering was all done with a printmaking process. Carving each individual stamp and making my own font that kind of shows the same style as they did with their protest posters in the early 1900s. When they were doing the protests, they were making a lot of their own protest posters with quilting methods, cutting out all their letters and sewing them on there by hand. So I was trying to mimic that style and that font with this. Here's some more detail shots of the beading. And again, this was just to make them very adorned with clothing, with really flashy, beautiful clothes, which a lot of them were already wearing really beautiful dresses in their portraits. I worked with the Indiana State Museum and Indiana State Library to find those archived photos and find that information about these women and how it relates to my community. Specifically, the woman in the front, you'll probably see another image in a minute, but her name is Grace Clark, and she grew up in Irvington, and right now I'm living in Irvington. So it's cool to see that history, where she grew up, where she went to school, and relate to that in today's time. And here's some more showing the traditional with the non-traditional. If you're familiar with the quilting process, I used all the women. I'll show images in a minute how I made the women, but they were printed on fabric and then made into one giant, like 2-foot applique, and had to be sewn onto the quilt. So that's very very hard to do. I didn't know how hard that was going to be at first, but it was interesting process to conquer. And then the quilt squares are more of a traditional way of making. This is how I was making the women. They were each individually carved lino cuts of the women. So I got to spend a lot of time with each woman and really, listen to videos about their history while I was working on it. So that was a fun process. And afterwards, I used these plates and printed them on paper and continued individualizing each woman's story and studying them further. Here's me at Cathead Press. Currently, I have a studio there, and at the time, I was a key holder membership, so I was able to go in and use their presses and print all the women onto the fabric. And later, I would go back to my studio and cut them out. And this was a huge part of the project. I wanted to have a performance aspect of it, to gather 4 generations of women in my family and recreate a quilting circle to finish the project. And this is where I wanted to bring up the appliques on the side with the flowers. I had at one point each member of my family, including my grandpa, my boyfriend, and my dad, were all embroidering these flowers in the corners of the room while I was doing the beading. It was really great to see. This is like a physical passing down of the skills. Even my 5-year-old niece already knew how to embroider because my sister taught her how to do it. So that was a really powerful moment to see that come to life. Here's some more images of that day. And they were there from the morning until the evening and stayed the night and came back and helped the next day too. So it was really, really awesome. I also made a mask to go along with the quilt, just to show the times that we're in, the times that I was making this. I started making it in April, and I was so grateful that I got the project, something to keep my mind off of the pandemic. But it is so hard to get quilting fabric right now because everyone's making masks. So that was a huge part of the trouble that I had, was just sourcing the materials that I needed. So I wanted to make a mask to reflect that time of searching for materials. But overall, I had a lot of fun doing the project. If you have any questions or want to know more about the project, it's all on my website, and that was CassieWoodworth.com. And there it is if you want to write it down. I'm also on Instagram, CassieWoodworth.art. So if you have any questions, let me know. And we're going to have a little question session at the end too. But now I'll take it over to Shelby.
Thanks, Kassie. That is really awesome to see the process behind all that. I'm going to screen share on here. There we go. And all right. My piece is called 19th. It is a 3x6 canvas. It's acrylic paint, and the name comes from, it's all lowercase except for the IN to stand for Indiana. And it represents Indiana passing the 19th Amendment. And then also, interestingly, Indiana is the 19th state to join the US. Not the 19th state to pass the amendments, 26th state for that, but just thought it was a fun tie-in. This is the concept art, the initial pieces I made back in about January. And it went through some changes since then, but this is the initial image I put forward. I wanted to show, to like really show what would be the moment that women's suffrage, what they were all kind of building up to, which was casting the vote and actually getting a chance to put their ballot in. So for my image, I really wanted to show that for the big piece. This is a tiny bit of like what the full-size image looks like. This is also the plaque that goes with it. And it's got a couple little details that you don't see right away from far away. I wanted to make it look like it had some embroidery on the dresses that said the names of Indiana suffragettes. So you can see a couple of them: Charity Dye, Marie Edwards. It's a little harder to see on the second pic, but Carrie Barnes Ross, Lillian Thomas Fox. It's got the names of the suffragettes sewn onto their clothing like they're sewn into history. And I don't have as many process pics because the place that I normally work in has been shut down for COVID, and the place that I live at now was under construction during the time I got to make the piece. So I created this in my parents' dining room in this weird little corner. So most of my pictures are of that, but I have more of the final pictures instead. When I was trying to create the image, at first, the last girl was not holding a baby, but I found this clipping, and it's from Indianapolis when women were voting for the first time, and it showed them with their children. And the quote underneath says that they said we would neglect our children when we got a chance to vote, but they were wrong. We bring them with us. And I thought that was very powerful, and also the fact that it had come from Indianapolis, that I wanted to include that in my final piece. This is a couple images of the people voting. When I asked the Indiana Arts Commission if they had a place in mind for the background, they were pretty open. So they told me a couple places where voting would actually happen, and it would be anywhere. You could have it in barbershops, you could have it in the church, you could have it just about anywhere. So I decided to put it in the Indiana State House, which would not have been a place that you use for voting. It wouldn't have even looked like that back then, but I think that would help connect viewers to how, even though it was 100 years ago, it isn't really that long. And it almost looks as if, since it's being viewed in the Indiana State House and you see it in the background, it's like you're looking through a window or a door into the past. This is some pictures of the Indiana State House. I kind of wanted it to look like this hallway and have the pillars and the yellow paints and stuff that's got back there. And for the dresses, I took a little bit of liberties. I mixed a little bit of 1920s with some 1910s and a little bit of a stylistic element because I did want to put the names on there. So they are probably a bit more fancy than what people would wear on their day of voting. But like Kassie said before, I really wanted to show them with all of their, just really make them the main figure, the main point. So to kind of glam it up a little bit more than you typically would if you were going to go cast your ballot, but it would be a pretty important day. This is the piece in Lieutenant Governor Crouch's office, and it shows kind of like what the final piece looks like and about how big it is. It's 6 feet, it's a little taller than me in the photo. It's kind of harder to tell, but it is a little bit smaller than life size. And that's about all of mine, just saving some room for questions at the end. If anyone has anything that they'd like to ask me or Kassie, I guess either do a, do you guys know how to do like the hand raise in the chat, and we can try and do people from there?
If we want to have people in the chat, we've actually already got one question in.
Sure thing.
From Caitlin, says, "Hi Kassie, great to see your work. Is there any historical significance in the color choice you made?"
Yes, there was. I actually privately messaged her the answer, but it was really about emphasizing the juxtaposition of the stereotype girly and glitzy and glamorous with these super strong women and the strength of the movement, and just emphasizing that with the beats. And also it was complementing the color of the peonies. So
we have another one asking, where is your work located, Kassie?
well, I was just in the Stutz for a year with my residency, and now I'm transitioning into a studio at Cathead Press. But I also have a lot of my work currently on my website and on Instagram. there's not very many shows going on just with COVID, but I'm sure that'll pick up soon, which I advertise on my social media.
Just a clarification, she is wondering where the large quilt itself is located at.
Yes, both of them are at the State House. The quilt is on the 4th floor, and I believe it's open to the public most of the time. And then Shelby's is on the 3rd floor, right? And whose office was that in?
Lieutenant Governor Crouch. I think both of ours might end up moving at some point to different parts of the State House, but that's where they are right now.
Yes, yes. It's a beautiful place to visit too.
We've got another question. Shelby, do you have any thoughts to share about your choice and historical significance in placing an African-American woman at the forefront of women voting?
Yeah, I really wanted to show an African-American woman voting because I feel like a lot of times they get missed out on most of the women's suffrage. It's really hard to find people's names too. They always talk about how Madam C.J. Walker would have like a meeting at her house, and you can't find like anyone's names of who was there, and it's very difficult to place them. So I feel like that is something that we need to show. I know someone was writing a book too. There was a person who was writing a book because of the suffragettes about Black women who were, and I think specifically Black Indiana women who helped to make the vote possible. But I think a lot of times they get skipped over when we talk about women voting. And I know that we have photos that show some people, but I really wanted to put them in the paintings to have Black women and white women voting together because they all made this possible for all of us.
And I think just to add on to that, a good historical point is that women of color and any person of color living in the United States really didn't have the opportunity to vote until like 40 years later when the Civil Rights Act was passed. So just to think of that is just absolutely crazy.
Wonderful. And if there's any other questions by those who have joined us, feel free to just throw them in the chat. All right, we've got one more asking, what do each of you look for in calls for art? What factors influence your decision to submit for proposals?
I actually just talked to a Heron's group yesterday about this. I try to apply for absolutely everything that's possible that I would be interested in. So like this one, for instance, I applied for in January, and I was sitting in a coffee shop for like 2 days straight, just applying to whatever I could find. And just trying to find opportunities that would be interesting or, further my resume or things like that. So.
I agree. I always make a big list. Oh, sorry. I always make a big list of everything I'm going to apply to and put like the dates and everything. And then I spend a day or so just applying to a ton of different things. I normally look for stuff. Indiana stuff is first, or stuff that is coming up quickly. And then I branch out from there. So stuff that is a little bit closer, like Ohio, or a different surrounding state like Michigan, place that's not too far away. And then it can go out a little bit from there.
Yeah, and to answer the second part of that question, I'm kind of the same way. And also it kind of depends on one, location, two, how much it's really gonna benefit me to spend my time applying for this thing. Is it gonna take me 3 days to type, basically papers to go with it, or is it just gonna be a quick submit? And usually I'll make a list of 2 separate ones that'll take time to do and ones that are a little bit easier.
And do either of you know how many works were commissioned overall in honor of the women's suffrage?
It was just the 2 of us, if I understand correctly, but yeah.
I think there might be a few more grants that, but for our specific thing, it was just us 2. But I've seen some things about, like, I know there was the lady who was writing the book, and there was a couple other things, but so far the only ones that we've talked about is just the 2 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And then where do you usually look for calls for art?
I personally look at indieartsguide.org, but each city kind of has their own call for artists. So I look at Chicago's a lot, I look at Cincinnati's a lot, and I'll post the link in the chat if you want to use that.
Yeah, Indie Arts Guide that's a really good one. They collect them from all over. And you're right about looking to different cities, because that's how I found out stuff for Sioux Falls is they have stuff on their website to do like big sculptures out there, and otherwise I wouldn't have looked for it. And it's kind of hard to find unless you start typing in cities and start trying to find things, which is kind of a long process, but worth it.
So we've also got Anna Trageser from the IAC shared a link to other works that were also commissioned as part of the Centennial celebration, if anyone's interested in looking.
Yeah, and they were a huge part of the project too. We worked with the Indiana State House, like I said, the Indiana State Library we worked with, and I might say that a lot of these were women, so that was really empowering to be working with all these really amazing women that were so passionate about the project personally, and people in the Lieutenant Governor's office and all kinds of people. So.
We've got one more asking, is there anything specific you do to make sure you're submitting a strong proposal when applying?
Personally, well, my sister's an English teacher, high school English teacher, so I definitely send it her way, and she sends it back with all kinds of red all over it. So having someone else read through it, make sure everything sounds good. And also, I tend to like sit on a day where I don't have anything to do, and I write out my artist statements and I edit my bios and make sure everything's good to go, so that when that opportunity comes along, I have like a little package set to go, and I'm confident in it, and I send it out.
I'm glad you do that with your sister too. I also do that with mine to have her check it because she does journalism. But for mine, I make a folder in my computer that has stuff that goes with each specific call, because everyone wants kind of something a little bit customized to them. And like you said, it's almost like writing a bunch of essays. So it'll be like a cover letter, a resume, if they want a concept piece, sometimes a letter of interest, and sometimes explaining your concept. So then you have at least 5 for most of them, somewhat more or less than that, but I just make a folder of all that stuff, and they all want it named differently too. So all of the images have, like, a previous work has a different name. So I just have different folders that go to each one.
All right. Looks like we don't have any other questions. So I'd like to thank you guys for all of your conversation and sharing your work, and everyone that submitted questions to the box. We are so excited to be kicking this off live. So make sure you join us here. We will be switching over to the keynote very shortly. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.